We now have the regular council committee of the whole meeting. I guess we'll just go right to a roll call.
Councilmember Ammon.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Hazen.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Roberts. Wu.
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here.
First action item is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting from March 12, 2018. Do I have a motion for approval?
So move.
Second.
Motion by Ammon, seconded by Wu. I guess we don't need a roll call. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. All right, are there any additions to the agenda for this evening? Seeing none, I guess we already did public input. Is there anyone else who... Well, we don't have any more cards, but is there anyone who wishes to address the committee of the whole? Okay. Do we have any presentations? Not seeing any on here. All right. Any staff reports? Nope. Get us out of here quick, John says. All right, so first up we have Resolution 2018-03-012R, a resolution accepting a distracted driving grant from the Illinois Department of Transportation. The UPD is going to let us know what is up.
This is a grant. It's a $6,300 grant from the Illinois Department of Transportation dealing with distracted drivers. We were picked by the Illinois Department of Transportation to put this on. We'll be conducting it between April 16th and April 30th in various areas around the city. We'll have what's called our STEP enforcement program. We'll use it through that. We'll have several officers out working, and they'll be in areas that are highly concentrated with vehicles and accidents. So they won't be done in the neighborhoods. They'll be done out in the major roadways like 5 Points, 130, Florida, and Race, where we've seen a high concentration of accidents. So this is to educate people on driving safely, not looking down at their phones, not texting, not talking on their phones while they're driving. And a lot of tickets will be issued, but there'll also be training where we'll see people walking in the street. Like this grant could also be used where we had the kid that was hit while he was texting, while he was looking down, crossing University. We also stop people when we see them doing that, just to inform them, educate on them on safety about being out there and being aware of your surroundings.
Are there any questions? Mr. Ammons.
So I want to make sure I have your title corrected.
I'm sorry, I'm Lieutenant Bob Fitzgerald.
All right, how you doing? All right, so the grant was speaking to, when I read through at least the memo, it was talking about it was for highway. Could you explain?
That's main roadways like Route 40, which Cunningham is Route 45. 130 is High Cross. Roads like that, but we can also use it in other areas of the city that have concentration, that have public funds to keep the streets.
Okay. So the other thing was the, you said that it would be some tickets issued, and I had a question earlier when I read through it, if these would just be warnings, if it was about education.
It would be tickets. We're trying to educate people on distracted driving, and if people are looking down, that's unsafe. I mean, we've had some serious injuries, even deaths in the city because of distracted drivers. So at this point, I would say, I'd have to look, but at this point, I'd say it would be mostly tickets that we'd be issuing on this.
Well, it's a little bit concerning to me because from an educational standpoint, I would figure we would, I mean, I understand it's dangerous, right, period, but to get a grant and to receive money, then generate money, you know, through the tickets, it just seems a little odd to me if we're going to do an educational piece, why we would ticket people if we could give them the warnings about it. I mean, it would still educate them about it, but I just wanted to find out what the position was. It's not a huge issue for me, but of course, seeing that we're still dealing with the traffic stop data and the disparities and stuff in relationship to that, I wanted to know if you had any comments or anything in relationship to how this would affect that in any way, shape, or form.
It would be added to the data. We're not going to have this separate. It would be added to the data that we update the council every quarter on. So this would be so it would be in April, it would be part of the second quarter of this year. So that would be added into the data that we would present later on in the year.
And so from a distracted driving standpoint, is this just cell phones? Is it putting on makeup? Is it eating a sandwich? What, I mean, and I'm serious because what actually qualifies?
The vast majority of it would be cell phone usage. Seatbelts would also be, people stop for seatbelts. I believe seatbelts is covered in this, if I read it correctly, but vast majority would be distracted driving, and that would be mostly cell phones, which is our biggest concern right now, which we've had documented, which we had most issues with, and also seatbelts.
But seatbelts wouldn't be distracted driving, though, would
I
it?
believe part of the grant, when I read it earlier, Lieutenant Joel Sanders is the one who worked on this. He couldn't make it today, and he's the one who did it. But reading the grant, it also covers seatbelts.
Okay. I think that was really it for me. Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
I just had a couple questions about the resolution. Whereas number 4 it refers to undertake one or more studies on the issues of distracted driving, and the one right after that said to undertake a study on the issue. I didn't see anything about a study or comparing data or anything that would make me think it was a study. Could we rewrite those two to? I mean, if somebody looked up our resolution 2 years from now and read it, it would sound like we're getting a grant for a study, not enforcement. So I'd rather that just clearly said that it was for enforcement.
I think I know Lieutenant Sanders worked hard on getting this grant, but I believe he has to fill out a report and send it into the state of Illinois once it's finished on what we did, how it was received, and the results of the stop. And I think that's what the part that's going to be added to their study, the Illinois Department of Transportation study.
Okay, I guess the other thing is, as an employee of the U of I, whenever I see study, I start thinking IRB, Institutional Review Board, and have to get permission from people to make sure that they're okay with being part of a study. But I guess if Joel could add enforcement to that, maybe that would, I think, be a little bit clearer for the future in case somebody looks at it in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Jacobson?
So if you would have to, you think largely people who are clearly driving distracted will get tickets rather than warnings?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, in other kinds of traffic stops, and of course you run the license, so you know the person's record of prior violations. And I'm going to guess, but I don't know, this is probably done really informally, that you might give a warning under a circumstance where this was a first violation or the first one in a very long time, but you might give a ticket if this was somebody who was repeatedly. Is that accurate, or am I overreaching in terms of my understanding of what's happening?
We run people through what's called leads. We get their information back, and a lot of times it won't tell us if a person's been ticketed before. It comes back with history, if they're suspended, and how many times he's been suspended or revoked. But after a while, the tickets fall off of there. So we can't really tell how many times they've been ticketed. Out-of-state drivers, other people were not able to figure that out. Depends on how that state puts that information in. But we run everything through leads. When that comes back, it doesn't necessarily tell us whether a pet person. It'll tell us if the person's been ticketed in the last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, I can't guarantee it'll tell us if that person's been ticketed or not.
So for the most part, the decision to give a warning or a ticket is based on the circumstances of the stop itself.
Right, and the traffic enforcement, our traffic enforcement details, vast majority of the time, we issue tickets on those. Those are things where we have officers work outside the regular hours and duties, and this is going to be part of that.
And this is going to be part of that, okay.
Mrs. Wu?
I'm just wondering if the lead system keeps track of warnings. So if somebody was given one warning.
No, that's
or-
kept by the city itself. We don't report that to the state, whether they
So,
got a
but do you
warning.
have a way of checking that when you pull over somebody?
The officer can check our ARMS database to see if they got a warning in the past. But that runs into extending the stop, because you have to go into our ARMS, run a person all over again, go into our ARMS database, check, pull the name up, and then see if they've been warned in the past on this.
Okay. So does the ARMS data also have the number of tickets and so forth if they were if they were stopped in this community? Because ARMS covers, right, the
Only-
whole region.
Right. Only, ARMS will cover what happens in Urbana.
Right.
So they'll have to look under Urbana, see if they're ticket under Urbana. Then they'll have to look under Champaign to see if they're ticket under Champaign. Then they have to look under the University of Illinois to see if they're ticket under them. So, yes, it does have it all, but they have to individually look at each department and when they stopped them and if they were ticketed or not.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wu. Are there any more questions for Lieutenant Fitzgerald? All right, Bill, did you want to make a formal amendment to the motion to include enforcement language in this resolution?
Well, if we're ready for a motion, I could just kind of include it in that, since we'll be forwarding it to council. So I'll move to send, this got a number on it? Yeah, resolution number 2018-03012R, a resolution accepting distracted driving grant from Illinois Department of Transportation to City Council with a recommendation for approval and changes and ask staff to make changes to incorporate enforcement in the language and check to make sure the study is really accurate.
I'll second.
All right, so I have a motion from Bill Brown, a second from Mary Alice. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. So pursuant, again, to the Liquor Control Act of 1934 and being unable to discuss this item, I'm going to ask my compatriot to the right, Mr. Hazen, to take the chair for me and bring up this ordinance for discussion.
Not a wise choice tonight, but okay.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you. Ordinance number 2018-03024, an ordinance amending City Code, Chapter 22, City Tax on Beer Keg Sales to Distributors. Mayor Marlin.
Yes, this is a proposed amendment to our city code, which covers local food and beverage taxes. And it was brought to our attention by one of the two local breweries here in Urbana that our city code required them to collect food and beverage tax on basically when they sold a keg of beer to a distributor, which would then be sold wholesale to a retailer who would then sell it to a customer. And we were informed that we were really the only community who was collecting this tax. And basically it's because we had never had breweries in the community before. So we're amending, proposing an amendment to our city code to exempt breweries who are selling, I'm going to make sure I get the language right, who are basically selling beer wholesale to distributors.
So where do we go from here? I'm sorry.
So we need a motion for approval?
Yeah, that's right. We get discussion later. Do we have a motion for approval?
I'll move approval.
Is this,
This be go to send to council.
I will move sending it to the council with a recommendation to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, so moved by Eric, seconded by Mary Alice Wu, and then for discussion, Mr. Ammons has his hand up already.
Is there an amount that was generated from this that we know?
We don't have those figures. In terms of the food and beverage tax that was collected?
Yes.
No, we don't have those figures.
And so the proposed change is because we're the only ones doing it?
Correct. Essentially, what we're doing is the food and beverage tax is intended to be charged to a consumer at the retail level. And these are breweries selling beer to distributors who are then selling it wholesale to the retailer. So the consumer will still pay the food and beverage tax, but at the point of consumption, which is the intent of the food and beverage tax.
So there should be no tax on a sale of a keg to a brewery? I'm trying to understand.
No, the brewery is
Selling
selling a
it.
keg to a
The
distributor.
distributor. So you're saying there should be
Wholesale.
no tax on that?
It's wholesale, correct.
So the end user.
Let me see if I can clarify it. The food and beverage tax applies to retail sales of food and alcoholic liquor, i.e. those who consume, the sales to people who will consume either on premises or off premises. The sale of a brewer's keg of beer, or several kegs of beer, however many they sell, is strictly a wholesale transaction, which throughout the state, at least I've not found any communities that are taxing a wholesale transaction. So normally, in fact, it's the consumer that pays the tax. The restaurant or the bar or whoever has the retail liquor license and who sells food is obligated to collect the tax and remit it to the, in our case, the city. But this is a wholesale tax. It does not apply this will not apply to packaged good sales at retail.
Bill Brown?
So if I understand this correctly, it wasn't ever explicit that beer was specifically was taxed, but somehow this was being interpreted that the kegs being sold to distributors should get this retail tax?
Because there was no loosely called manufacturers, brewers, vintners, people who distill spirits that we know of anyway going on in the city for sale, whether it be to a consumer like beer tasting or you go into one or both of our breweries to buy a six-pack versus keg sales. Both of these businesses are new to Urbana. And so when whoever drafted the original ordinance didn't contemplate and didn't need to contemplate at that time operations that include the wholesaling of I'll call it loosely manufactured alcoholic liquor within the city.
Okay. I mean, it sounds kind of like if we had a wholesale bakery, somehow we would be collecting tax on the bread that was going out for distribution. I know we've never done that, so I just don't understand why we ever collected this tax.
Well, this actually came up in the course of a conversation with Riggs, and they were in the city, at the city hall on another topic, and they happened to say, hey, why are you making us collect this tax? Because they had read the code. And when we looked into it, we said, well, you shouldn't be. So we are amending the code to basically
To clarify that.
clarify things. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any further discussion? Mr. Emmett?
Why would this only apply to beer? Is that the only thing that we sell wholesale, that we see Okay. Okay.
If we get a vintner in town that sells wholesale, we will probably at that point come back to you.
Okay.
Any further questions or discussions? Are we ready to vote? All in favor of moving this forward, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Mr. Miller, would you care to be the one to adjourn this meeting? You can do it. Really? The meeting's adjourned.